Hello, welcome back to Insomnia History, where we bring the strangest and most haunting stories from the past to light up your night. Before we set sail, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because every click gives us the energy to keep going, sharing more mind-bending tales, night after night. Now, let's drift back to 1872, across the foggy Atlantic, to a mystery that has baffled sailors and historians for over a century. A ship found adrift with no crew, no sign of struggle, and no clue to explain what happened. The Mary Celeste wasn't just a ghost ship. It was a riddle that defied all logic. Are you ready to dive in? Let's get started. In the cold waters of the North Atlantic, during the waning days of 1872, an extraordinary maritime mystery was born. A mystery that would captivate generations, spawn countless theories, and remain unsolved to this day. The abandoned ship, Mary Celeste, found drifting without her crew, represents perhaps the most perfect maritime riddle ever documented. But to understand the full magnitude of this mystery, we must first understand its origins. The story of the Mary Celeste begins not with her famous disappearance, but with her birth in a small shipyard in Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia, in 1861. Initially christened as the Amazon, she was a modest brigantine, 103 feet long, with a 25-foot beam and weighing 282 tons. She was constructed of locally sourced timber, primarily spruce, pine, and oak, built solid to withstand the harsh North Atlantic conditions she would face throughout her career. The Amazon was a typical merchant vessel of her day, designed for cargo transportation rather than luxury or speed. With two masts and a straightforward square-rigged design, she represented the backbone of 19th century international commerce. Her construction was completed during a time when wooden sailing vessels still dominated maritime trade, though steam power was rapidly gaining prominence. From the moment of her launch, however, a dark cloud seemed to hang over the vessel. During her maiden voyage, her first captain, Robert McClellan, fell ill with pneumonia and died. This unfortunate beginning was merely the first in a series of incidents that would later contribute to the ship's mysterious reputation. The Amazon's troubles continued over the next decade. She collided with fishing equipment in the English Channel and later ran aground in Cape Breton Island. These accidents, while not unusual for vessels of that era, nonetheless added to a growing narrative of misfortune. Insurance records of the time note several owners and multiple instances of damage and repair throughout her early years. By 1867, the Amazon had been sold to American owners, and following a serious storm damage incident, she underwent significant repairs in New York. It was at this point that her identity began to transform. The renovated vessel was registered anew in the United States, and her name was changed to Mary Celeste. The origins of this new name remain somewhat unclear, though some sources suggest it may have been inspired by the name of a relative of one of her new owners. The maritime world of the 1860s and 1870s operated at a fascinating crossroads of technological transition. While steam-powered vessels were increasingly common on major shipping routes, sailing ships still dominated many trade corridors due to their economic efficiency. Without the need for coal, sailing vessels could dedicate more space to cargo, making them particularly profitable for certain goods and routes. These were years of remarkable global commerce. The end of the American Civil War had reinvigorated international trade. The Suez Canal had opened in 1869, dramatically reducing journey times between Europe and Asia. The transatlantic routes connected the booming industrial centers of Europe with the raw materials and growing markets of the Americas. In this vibrant economic landscape, vessels like the Mary Celeste formed the crucial links in global supply chains. For captains and crews, life at sea remained dangerous and unpredictable. Navigation relied on celestial observation and dead reckoning. Weather forecasting was primitive by modern standards. Communication between ships happened only within visual range, and once a vessel departed port, it essentially vanished from contact until reaching its destination. This isolation would later prove crucial in understanding the Mary Celeste mystery. In 1872, the Mary Celeste came under the partial ownership of Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, who would become her final captain. Briggs was no ordinary seafarer. Born in 1835 in Massachusetts, he came from a family with deep maritime traditions. His father, several brothers were all captains, and Benjamin himself had commanded multiple vessels with distinction prior to acquiring interest in the Mary Celeste. Briggs represented the ideal of the New England sea captain of his era. He was deeply religious, abstained from alcohol, and was known for his conservative and cautious approach to seamanship. Contemporary accounts describe him as methodical, experienced, and level-headed. At 37 years old, he had spent most of his life at sea and had earned a reputation for reliability and sound judgment. Unlike the stereotypical rough-hewn sea captain, Briggs was a family man deeply devoted to his wife Sarah and their 2 children. So close was his bond with his family that he frequently brought them along on voyages, unwilling to endure the long separations typical of his profession. For the fateful voyage of November 1872, he had arranged for his wife and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia to accompany him. Their 7-year-old son Arthur remained behind with relatives to continue his schooling. The crew assembled for this journey was small, but seemingly capable. First, mate Albert Richardson was an experienced sailor with a solid reputation. Second mate Andrew Gilling was less well documented, but considered competent. The ship's complement was rounded out by 4 seamen: German sailors Volkert Lorenzen and Boz Lorenzen, not related despite sharing a surname, and 2 Americans, Arian Martins and Gottlieb Gautschall. This crew of 7, plus Captain Briggs, his wife and daughter, would constitute the full human cargo of the Mary Celeste on her mysterious final voyage. The Mary Celeste had undergone additional renovations and improvements under Briggs' partial ownership. The ship had been thoroughly overhauled, with particular attention paid to the below-deck areas and cargo holds. New decking had been installed, and the rigging had been checked and reinforced where necessary. By all accounts, she was in excellent condition as she prepared for what would prove to be her most famous journey. Captain Briggs had secured a cargo contract to transport 1701 barrels of commercial alcohol from New York to Genoa, Italy. This industrial alcohol, intended for fortifying Italian wines, represented a valuable but potentially hazardous cargo. The barrels were carefully stowed in the hold, and according to later inspection, properly secured according to the standards of the time. In the days before departure, Captain Briggs wrote several letters to his mother and business partners, expressing optimism about the journey ahead. In one such correspondence, he mentioned good weather forecasts and his expectation of a profitable, uneventful crossing. There was no hint of apprehension, no premonition of danger. By all indications, this was to be a routine commercial voyage. On November 5, 1872, with cargo loaded and preparations complete, the Mary Celeste departed from Pier 50 on the East River in New York Harbor. The weather was clear and favorable as the brigantine made her way out of the harbor and into the open Atlantic. Observers later recalled nothing unusual about her departure. Captain Briggs, his family, and crew appeared in good spirits as they set sail for Genoa. 8 days later, on November 13th, another vessel departed from the same harbor, bound for Gibraltar. This was the Dei Gratia, a brigantine similar to the Mary Celeste in size and design. Her captain, David Reed Morehouse, was casually acquainted with Benjamin Briggs, having reportedly shared a meal with him shortly before their respective departures. Neither man could have imagined how their fates would intersect in one of history's most perplexing maritime mysteries. The initial days of Mary Celeste's voyage proceeded without incident. According to the ship's log later recovered, the vessel made good progress eastward, encountering generally favorable conditions. Captain Briggs maintained his meticulous nature, ensuring regular log entries and proper navigation records. The last known log entry, dated November 25, placed the ship approximately 400 miles east of the Azores, well on course for the Mediterranean. As November turned to December, the two ships, Mary Celeste and Dei Gratia, were unwittingly sailing similar routes across the Atlantic. Separated by a week's head start and likely different speeds, they nonetheless traversed the same general corridor of ocean, heading toward the Strait of Gibraltar and the Mediterranean beyond. What happened in the final days of November aboard the Mary Celeste remains unknown, lost to the ages like so many maritime secrets. What we do know is that something extraordinary occurred, something that would transform this ordinary merchant vessel into an enduring symbol of mystery and intrigue. The fate that befell Captain Briggs, his family and crew, would become one of the most debated enigmas in seafaring history. Among seafarers of the 19th century, superstitions ran deep. Many believed that certain vessels were inherently unlucky, cursed from the moment their keels were laid. The troubled early history of the Mary Celeste, first as the Amazon and later under her new identity, had already marked her in the minds of some sailors as a ship of ill fortune. These superstitions would only intensify in the years following her infamous abandonment. Maritime traditions of the era included numerous rituals and practices designed to ensure safe passage. Ships were often christened with champagne, captains might carry lucky charms, and certain days were considered inauspicious for beginning voyages. Whether Captain Briggs, a devout Christian, held any such superstitions is unknown, but the religious medallion later found among his personal effects suggests he may have sought divine protection for his journey. The Mary Celeste sailed during the golden age of sail, but also during a period of transition. Telegraph cables now connected continents, steam power was challenging wind, and international shipping was becoming more regulated and systematic. Yet for all these advances, the fundamental isolation and vulnerability of ships at sea remained unchanged since ancient times. Once beyond sight of land, a vessel was essentially alone in the vastness of the ocean, dependent entirely on the skill of its crew and the mercy of the elements. For the Mary Celeste, sailing toward Italy with her cargo of alcohol, the Mediterranean represented the cradle of Western maritime tradition. Phoenicians, Greeks, Romans, and countless others had plied these waters for millennia before her. The route she followed was well established, the dangers well documented. There seemed little reason for concern as she made steady progress eastward. Yet, something happened, something unexpected, and apparently alarming enough to cause the complete abandonment of a seaworthy vessel in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. As the Mary Celeste continued her ghostly drift across the open sea, her destiny was sealed. In the coming days, the chance encounter with the Dei Gratia would transform this ordinary merchant ship into the most famous ghost ship in maritime history. The story of the Mary Celeste, with its missing crew and abandoned cargo, would soon captivate the world. But in those final days of November 1872, as Captain Briggs made his last log entries and went about his duties, there was no indication that anything was amiss. No hint that within days, his ship would become an empty vessel, drifting silently through the Atlantic waves, waiting to give birth to a mystery that would endure for generations to come. As the Mary Celeste sailed eastward across the Atlantic in November 1872, she followed trade routes well established over centuries of maritime commerce. Her destination, the Italian port of Genoa, represented one of the Mediterranean's busiest commercial centers, a city with a rich maritime history dating back to ancient times. The journey from New York to Genoa, typically took between 30 and 40 days, depending on weather conditions and the specific route chosen. Captain Benjamin Briggs had meticulously planned this voyage. The vessel's hold contained 1701 barrels of industrial alcohol, a common cargo of the era used primarily for fortifying Italian wines. This represented a substantial shipment worth approximately $35,000, the equivalent of nearly $800,000 in today's currency. The alcohol was raw, undrinkable, and highly flammable, requiring careful handling and storage. The Mary Celeste had been thoroughly prepared for this Atlantic crossing. Her hull was sound, her rigging in good repair, and her supplies ample for the journey ahead. The vessel carried provisions calculated to last 6 months, far more than necessary for the planned voyage. The galley was well stocked with food and fresh water. Captain Briggs, known for his methodical nature, had ensured every detail was addressed before departure. The early days of the voyage proceeded without remarkable incident. The weather, while not ideal, presented no unusual challenges for an experienced captain and crew. The ship's log, later recovered, documented routine progress and ordinary shipboard activities. The last entry, dated November 25th, placed the Mary Celeste approximately 400 nautical miles east of the Azores Islands, making steady progress toward the Mediterranean. This final log entry noted the ship's position as latitude 36°56°56' north, longitude 27°20' west, well within the normal shipping lanes of the time. The entry mentioned moderate winds and seas, with no indication of distress or unusual circumstances. Weather records from other vessels in the vicinity confirmed generally favorable conditions in the region during this period, though some reported increasing wind and choppy seas in the days that followed. Captain Briggs had given no indication of concern in his log entries. His notations were professional and concise, focusing on navigation details, weather observations, and routine shipboard matters. The handwriting showed no signs of stress or urgency. By all available evidence, the Mary Celeste's journey had been progressing normally up to the point of the final entry. During these same late November days, another vessel was making its way across the Atlantic along a similar route. The DEA Gracia, captained by David Reed Morehouse, had departed New York on November 13th, 8 days after the Mary Celeste. The DEA Gracia was also a brigantine, similar in size and design to the Mary Celeste, carrying a cargo bound for Gibraltar. Captain Morehouse knew Benjamin Briggs casually, as was common among captains operating in the same commercial circles. Some accounts suggest they had shared a meal shortly before their respective departures from New York. Though the details of this meeting remain somewhat unclear in historical records. Regardless, Morehouse was familiar enough with Briggs to recognize his reputation as a capable and cautious mariner. As the DEI Gracia continued her eastward journey, her crew settled into the routine rhythms of life at sea. December arrived, bringing slightly cooler temperatures, but no significant change in conditions. The Atlantic, in early winter, could be unpredictable. But thus far, the crossing had been relatively uneventful for Morehouse and his men. On December 4th, 1872, approximately 400 miles east of the Azores, the monotony of the DEA Gracia's voyage was suddenly broken. At approximately 1:00 p.m., the helmsman spotted a vessel in the distance, moving in an irregular pattern that immediately caught the crew's attention. The ship appeared to be under partial sail but was yawing strangely, her movements suggesting she was not under proper control. Captain Morehouse observed the vessel through his spyglass, noting her erratic behavior. An experienced mariner, he recognized that something was amiss. The ship was under short canvas, meaning only some of her sails were deployed, and was drifting at an angle to the wind rather than maintaining a steady course. This unusual movement pattern strongly suggested that no one was at the helm. For several hours, the Dei Gratia tracked the mysterious vessel, gradually closing the distance between them. As they drew nearer, Morehouse was able to identify her as a brigantine flying no distress signals. Eventually, he recognized her as the Mary Celeste, the very ship that had departed New York 8 days before his own vessel. Concerned about the situation, Morehouse ordered his first mate, Oliver DeVoe, and second mate, John Wright, to take a small boat and investigate. The sea conditions were moderate, with waves of 3 to 4 feet and steady winds, making the small boat journey challenging but manageable. As DeVoe and Wright rowed toward the Mary Celeste, they called out repeatedly but received no response. Upon reaching the silent vessel, the boarding party discovered what would become one of maritime history's most enduring mysteries. The Mary Celeste was completely deserted. There was no sign of Captain Briggs, his family, or any of the crew members. The ship was ghostly silent, rocking gently in the Atlantic swells, an abandoned vessel far from shore. The initial observations made by DeVoe and Wright were meticulous and would later prove crucial in the investigation. They found the Mary Celeste in generally good condition, with no major damage to her hull or rigging. She was somewhat disheveled, but fundamentally seaworthy. Her cargo was intact, though they noted that several hatches were open, unusual for a vessel at sea, particularly in the Atlantic during winter months. The main hatch cover had been removed and was found beside the opening, suggesting a deliberate action rather than damage from a storm. The forward hatch was also open, but secured. 9 of the ship's barrels of alcohol were empty, though the remainder appeared undamaged. Later inspection would confirm that these empty barrels had likely leaked due to poor construction, rather than being emptied by human action. Below decks, the boarding party found further evidence of a hasty but orderly departure. Captain's cabin was untouched, with valuables left behind. Briggs' navigational instruments remained in place, though the ship's chronometer and sextant were missing, suggesting they had been taken deliberately. The vessel's single lifeboat was also missing, apparently launched in a controlled manner rather than torn away in a storm. In the crew's quarters, personal belongings remained undisturbed. Clothing hung from hooks, sea chests contained personal items, and there were no signs of panic or struggle. The galley showed evidence of recent use, with food partially prepared. A sewing machine stood with work still in progress. Everything pointed to a sudden but organized abandonment, rather than a violent incident or catastrophic event. Perhaps most puzzling was the overall seaworthiness of the vessel. The Mary Celeste was sound, with only minimal water in her bilges, not unusual for a wooden ship of her era. Her pumps were in working order. The cargo, while showing some signs of movement, remained largely secure. There was no evident reason why a capable captain like Briggs would abandon such a vessel, particularly with his wife and young daughter aboard. The boarding party found the ship's log and daily slate in the captain's cabin. The log's final entry was dated November 25th, 9 days earlier, showing nothing unusual. The slate, typically used for temporary notations before being transferred to the permanent log, contained calculations that placed the ship near the Santa Maria Island in the Azores on the morning of November 25. This corresponded with the final log entry. Significantly, the daily log contained no mention of storms, mechanical problems, illness, or any other emergency that might explain the abandonment. The 9-day gap between the final log entry and the discovery of the deserted vessel became one of the central mysteries of the case. What had transpired during those missing days remained undocumented and unknown. After completing their initial examination, DeVoe returned to the Dei Gratia to report their findings to Captain Morehouse. The situation presented both a moral dilemma and a potential financial opportunity. Maritime law permitted salvage claims on abandoned vessels, potentially providing a significant reward for the crew of the Da Gracia if they could successfully bring the Mary Celeste to port. Morehouse, after careful consideration, decided to divide his crew. DeVoe and two experienced seamen would sail the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, their original destination, while Morehouse would continue commanding the DEI Gracia. This decision to salvage the vessel, while economically motivated, also ensured that valuable cargo would not be lost, and that the mysterious circumstances could be properly investigated by authorities. The two ships set course for Gibraltar, sailing in company when possible, though the undermanned Mary Celeste proved difficult to handle with just 3 men aboard. The reduced crew struggled to manage the vessel properly, particularly during changing weather conditions. Despite these challenges, both ships eventually reached Gibraltar safely, with the Mary Celeste arriving on December 13, 1872. Upon arrival in Gibraltar, the mystery of the Mary Celeste immediately captured public attention. British authorities took custody of the vessel and began a thorough investigation. The Vice Admiralty Court in Gibraltar, responsible for maritime matters, initiated formal salvage proceedings and an inquiry into the mysterious circumstances of the ship's abandonment. News of the ghost ship spread rapidly through the port of Gibraltar, a busy international harbor where sailors from many nations gathered. The story of the abandoned vessel with its missing captain, family, and crew sparked immediate speculation. Within days, reports had reached London and New York, where newspapers began publishing increasingly sensationalized accounts of the discovery. Frederick Solly Flood, the Attorney General of Gibraltar, personally took charge of the investigation. He ordered a detailed examination of the Mary Celeste, bringing in experts to inspect every aspect of the vessel. Marine surveyors documented the ship's condition, cargo specialists examined the alcohol barrels, and experienced captains were consulted regarding possible scenarios that might explain the abandonment. The investigation revealed several curious details that only deepened the mystery. The ship's papers were missing, except for the captain's log. The ship's clock was found stopped. A sword in the captain's cabin showed signs of recent handling. A rope was found hanging over the side of the vessel, apparently cut rather than broken. Each discovery raised new questions rather than providing clear answers. Most significantly, investigators found no signs of violence, struggle, or forced entry. There were no bloodstains, no evidence of piracy or criminal activity. The personal belongings of the passengers and crew, including money and valuables, remained untouched. Whatever had led to the abandonment of the Mary Celeste, it apparently had not involved violence or theft. As the official inquiry continued in Gibraltar, the fate of the missing people became the central concern. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and the 7 crew members had vanished without trace. Despite extensive searches and inquiries, no sightings of the missing lifeboat were ever confirmed. No bodies were recovered. The 10 people who had departed New York aboard the Mary Celeste had simply disappeared. The disappearance of an entire ship's complement, including a woman and child, struck a particular chord of horror in the Victorian public. Newspapers in Europe and America published dramatic accounts, often embellishing the facts with fictional details. Some reports claimed bloodstains had been found on the sword, while others suggested signs of a violent struggle. These sensationalized versions, though lacking factual basis, helped cement the Mary Celeste in public consciousness as the quintessential ghost ship. As 1872 drew to a close, the Mary Celeste remained impounded in Gibraltar, her silent decks offering no further clues to the fate of those who had sailed her. The discovery of the abandoned vessel had sparked what would become one of history's most enduring maritime mysteries. In the months and years to come, investigators, journalists, and curious minds would propose countless theories to explain the inexplicable disappearance of 10 souls from a seaworthy ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. As the Mary Celeste sat anchored in Gibraltar Harbor in December 1872, she became the center of one of the most intensive maritime investigations of the era. The Vice Admiralty Court of Gibraltar, accustomed to handling routine shipping matters and salvage claims, now faced an unprecedented mystery. The abandoned brigantine, found sailing with no human presence yet in seaworthy condition, presented a puzzle that defied conventional explanation. Frederick Flood, the British Attorney General for Gibraltar, took personal charge of the investigation. A meticulous and somewhat rigid legal mind, Flood approached the case with skepticism bordering on suspicion. From the outset, he seemed inclined to believe that some form of foul play or fraud had occurred, rather than accepting the possibility of a genuine mystery. His investigation would be thorough, but colored by this initial bias. The most concrete evidence available was the captain's logbook, recovered from the master's cabin. This leather-bound volume contained detailed entries of the voyage, written in Captain Briggs' steady, practiced hand. The entries were routine and unremarkable, noting weather conditions, navigational calculations, and daily progress. The final entry, dated November 25, placed the vessel approximately 400 miles east of the Azores. This entry gave no indication of distress, unusual circumstances, or impending danger. Particularly puzzling was the 9-day gap between this final log entry and the discovery of the abandoned vessel on December 4th. What had transpired during those missing days? The daily slate, used for temporary notations before being transferred to the permanent log, contained calculations consistent with the ship's position on November 25th. But nothing beyond that date. This suggested that whatever led to the abandonment had occurred suddenly, without time for further documentation. The condition of the captain's cabin provided additional clues. Briggs' navigational instruments were conspicuously incomplete. The ship's sextant and chronometer were missing, while other valuable items remained untouched. A chronometer was essential for determining longitude at sea, while a sextant enabled celestial navigation. Their absence suggested a deliberate decision to take crucial navigational tools, implying the crew expected to need them elsewhere, presumably on the missing lifeboat. Personal possessions throughout the vessel remained largely undisturbed. In the captain's quarters, Briggs' personal papers were neatly arranged. His wife's belongings, including jewelry of significant value, remained in place. A small child's toys and clothing, belonging to 2-year-old Sophia Briggs, were found carefully stored, showing no signs of hasty packing or disorder. These details contradicted any theory of piracy or violent confrontation. The crew's quarters told a similar story. Personal effects remained in sea chests and hanging from hooks. Warm clothing was left behind, despite the December Atlantic chill. Tobacco pipes sat ready for use. A half-eaten meal was discovered in the galley, along with partially prepared food, suggesting the abandonment had occurred around mealtime. A sewing machine stood with work still in progress, needle paused mid-stitch in a piece of cloth. One of the most significant findings was the state of the ship's pumps. These crucial pieces of equipment, used to remove water from a vessel's bilges, showed signs of recent use. However, investigators found only a small amount of water in the bilge, approximately 3.5 feet, at the deepest point. While this represented more water than ideal for a wooden ship, it was far from a catastrophic level that would threaten the vessel's buoyancy or stability. The ship's rigging and sails presented another important set of clues. When discovered, the Mary Celeste was under reduced sail, with only the lower sails set. This configuration was appropriate for rough weather, but unusual for the moderate conditions reported in the area. The sails themselves showed signs of wind damage, but remained serviceable. The main hatch covers were off, but nearby, suggesting they had been removed deliberately rather than torn away by weather. Perhaps Most tellingly, the ship's only lifeboat was missing. Examination of the davits, the small cranes used to lower boats, showed no signs of damage or hasty deployment. The securing ropes appeared to have been cut cleanly, rather than torn away in panic or storm. This suggested a controlled, deliberate evacuation, rather than a chaotic emergency response. A length of rope was found trailing from the ship's bow, approximately 30 fathoms, 180 feet, long. This rope had been securely attached to the ship, but showed signs of having been cut at the free end. Some investigators speculated that this rope might have been used to tow the lifeboat, keeping the crew in proximity to their vessel while they assessed an uncertain situation. Inside the cargo hold, the 1701 barrels of industrial alcohol showed signs of movement, but remained largely intact. 9 of these barrels were found empty. Careful examination revealed that these particular barrels had defective staves, likely allowing their contents to leak. This leakage, while relatively minor in volume, would have released alcohol vapors into the confined space of the hold. A potentially dangerous situation, given the flammability of ethanol fumes. The ship's structural integrity remained sound, with no evidence of collision, fire damage, or other catastrophic events. The hull planking was intact, with normal levels of seepage for a wooden vessel. The masts and spars showed no unusual damage. By all physical evidence, the Mary Celeste remained entirely seaworthy at the time of her abandonment. In the captain's cabin, investigators discovered a sword, which some early newspaper reports claimed was stained with blood. Forensic examination, however, determined that the marks were merely rust, not blood. This correction did little to stem the tide of sensationalist reporting that had already begun to surround the case. The ship's chronometer was missing, but the wall-mounted cabin clock had stopped. The time it displayed could not be definitively connected to the abandonment, as the clock required regular winding and could have simply run down naturally. Nevertheless, the frozen hands added to the eerie tableau of interrupted shipboard life. Weather records from other vessels in the region indicated deteriorating conditions around November 24-25, with increasing winds and choppy seas. While not a full-scale storm, these conditions might have created concern for a captain with his family aboard, particularly if combined with other troubling circumstances. Yet, numerous vessels had navigated the same waters during this period without incident, making weather alone an insufficient explanation. As the physical evidence was catalogued, Frederick Solly Flood expanded his investigation to include interviews and depositions. The crew members of the DEI Gracia, who had first boarded the Mary Celeste, provided detailed statements about their discoveries. Captain Morehouse was questioned extensively about his prior knowledge of Captain Briggs and the circumstances of their respective departures from New York. Solly Flood seemed particularly interested in establishing a connection between Morehouse and Briggs that might suggest collusion. The salvage claim filed by the DA Gratia's crew represented a significant financial incentive, potentially up to 1/3 of the value of ship and cargo, or approximately $46,000, equivalent to over $1 million today. This substantial reward led Solly Flood to consider whether the abandonment might have been staged as part of an insurance fraud scheme. The insurance investigation ran parallel to the official inquiry. Lazarus and Woolley, representing the insurers of the Mary Celeste, dispatched their own investigator, Captain R.W. Shuffelt of the American Navy. Schuffelt's examination was thorough and professional, focusing on the vessel's seaworthiness and the plausibility of various abandonment scenarios. His conclusions generally supported the integrity of the salvage claim, finding no evidence of fraud or conspiracy. Despite the lack of supporting evidence, Solly Flood continued to pursue the fraud theory. He ordered detailed background checks on Captain Briggs, his financial situation, and his relationship with the vessel's owners. These investigations revealed Briggs to be a man of modest means, but impeccable reputation, with no history of financial difficulties or impropriety. The part owner of the Mary Celeste, James Winchester, was similarly cleared of suspicion, a successful businessman with no apparent motive for fraud. The possibility of piracy was also thoroughly investigated. The waters east of the Azores were not known as a piracy hotspot in the 1870s, but isolated incidents could not be ruled out entirely. However, the absence of signs of struggle, the presence of valuable items left untouched, and the orderly nature of the abandonment argued strongly against a pirate attack. Moreover, no reports of suspicious vessels or pirate activity had been recorded in the region during the relevant period. Another theory considered was mutiny, a not uncommon occurrence on merchant vessels of the era. Relations between captains and crews could be strained, particularly on long voyages under difficult conditions. However, Captain Briggs had a reputation for fair treatment of his men, and the crew of the Mary Celeste had been newly hired for this voyage, giving little time for serious grievances to develop. Furthermore, a mutiny would not explain why the mutineers would abandon a perfectly good ship in favor of a small lifeboat far from land. As the investigation progressed through December 1872 and into January 1873, no definitive conclusion emerged. The physical evidence presented a paradox: a seaworthy vessel, abandoned in an apparently controlled manner, with no clear threat to its safety. The missing crew and passengers had vanished without trace, taking the ship's papers, navigational instruments, and only the barest necessities with them. The salvage hearings continued into February 1873, with Solly Flood maintaining his skepticism regarding the Dei Gratia crew's account. Despite the lack of evidence supporting foul play, he seemed reluctant to accept the possibility that the Mary Celeste had been abandoned for legitimate reasons that simply remained undiscovered. This bias colored the proceedings and would ultimately affect the salvage award. In March 1873, the Vice Admiralty Court finally rendered its decision. The Dei Gratia's crew was granted a salvage award of only 1/5 of the total value, significantly less than the customary 1/3 for a successful salvage operation. This reduced amount reflected the court's lingering suspicions. Despite the absence of concrete evidence of wrongdoing, the Mary Celeste herself was released from custody and eventually returned to service under new ownership. The official investigation concluded without determining the fate of the missing people or the exact circumstances of the abandonment. Despite months of inquiry, the mystery remained essentially unsolved. The disappearance of Captain Briggs, his family, and crew entered maritime lore as one of the sea's great unsolved mysteries. As news of the Mary Celeste spread globally, public fascination grew. Newspapers throughout Europe and America covered the story extensively, often embellishing facts or adding fictional details to enhance the drama. The New York Times, Gibraltar Chronicle, and London papers published regular updates on the investigation, speculating widely about possible explanations for the abandonment. By the time the official inquiry closed, the absence of a conclusive explanation had only heightened public interest. The Mary Celeste had become more than just an abandoned vessel. She had transformed into a symbol of the sea's enduring mysteries and dangers. In the vacuum created by the lack of definitive answers, theories both rational and fantastic began to flourish, each attempting to solve the puzzle of what had driven 10 people to abandon a sound ship in the middle of the Atlantic, never to be seen again. The absence of a definitive explanation for the Mary Celeste abandonment created fertile ground for theories. In the decades following the incident, numerous hypotheses emerged attempting to solve the mystery through scientific reasoning rather than supernatural speculation. These theories, grounded in physics, meteorology, chemistry, and human psychology, offer plausible explanations for why 10 people might abandon a seaworthy vessel in the middle of the Atlantic. Among the most enduring scientific explanations involves the cargo itself. The Mary Celeste carried 1701 barrels of industrial alcohol in her hold, a volatile substance with a low flash point. 9 of these barrels were discovered empty upon investigation, their contents having leaked due to faulty construction. This leakage introduced alcohol vapors into the confined space of the cargo hold, creating conditions potentially conducive to a phenomenon known as a displacement explosion. In a displacement explosion, flammable vapors accumulate in an enclosed space, reaching a critical concentration. When this vapor-air mixture encounters a spark or flame, it can ignite explosively, creating a sudden pressure wave. However, unlike a conventional explosion with sustained combustion, a displacement explosion rapidly consumes the available oxygen, often extinguishing itself almost immediately after ignition. This theory suggests that alcohol vapors from the leaking barrels accumulated in the hold, eventually finding their way to upper areas of the vessel. A minor spark, perhaps from a galley stove, a lantern, or even static electricity, could have ignited these vapors, causing a sudden, alarming explosion. The blast would have been powerful enough to frighten the crew, yet might have left minimal visible damage to the ship's structure. Captain Briggs, responsible for his family's safety and unfamiliar with the precise behavior of alcohol vapor explosions, might have ordered an evacuation, fearing that the initial blast presaged a catastrophic fire or further explosions. In the era before detailed understanding of combustion chemistry, such caution would have been reasonable, particularly given the nature of the cargo and the presence of his wife and young daughter aboard. Experiments conducted in the early 20th century lend credence to this theory. When alcohol vapors of similar concentration were ignited in controlled settings, they produced precisely the kind of rapid, self-extinguishing explosion that might explain the Mary Celeste scenario. The force generated would be sufficient to cause alarm without necessarily leaving obvious structural damage. The open hatches discovered by the DEE Gracia boarding party support this theory. Captain Briggs had detected alcohol fumes. He might have ordered the hatches opened for ventilation. Similarly, the cut rope trailing from the vessel's bow could be explained as a tether between the ship and lifeboat, allowing the crew to maintain a safe distance while assessing whether the danger had passed. However, critics of the alcohol vapor theory point to several inconsistencies. The winter temperatures in the North Atlantic would have inhibited rapid evaporation of the alcohol. The captain's logbook contained no mention of leaking cargo or concerning odors. Additionally, Briggs was an experienced captain who had transported hazardous cargo before, and would likely have understood that a brief flash fire posed less danger than abandoning ship in the open ocean. A second scientific theory focuses on meteorological phenomena, specifically the occurrence of a waterspout. Waterspouts are essentially tornadoes that form over water, capable of generating wind speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. These violent vortices can appear with relatively little warning, particularly in regions with unstable atmospheric conditions, like those found in the eastern Atlantic. Historical weather records confirm that conditions in late November 1872 could have supported waterspout formation in the vicinity of the Mary Celeste's last known position. A sudden encounter with such a phenomenon would have presented an immediate and terrifying threat to the vessel. The sight of a massive water column approaching the ship, accompanied by rapidly darkening skies and violent wind shifts, might have prompted Captain Briggs to order an emergency evacuation. The waterspout theory explains several observed conditions aboard the abandoned vessel. The sails found partially furled suggest a hasty response to deteriorating weather. The minimal water in the bilges could indicate that the ship had experienced heavy seas shortly before abandonment. The missing lifeboat and navigational instruments align with an emergency Evacuation scenario. If the Mary Celeste had encountered a waterspout, the lifeboat might have been deployed with the intention of maintaining a safe distance from the ship while the waterspout passed. In such a scenario, the lifeboat could have subsequently been carried away by currents or winds, separating it permanently from the mother vessel. Alternatively, the waterspout itself might have directly struck the small lifeboat after the evacuation, leading to the loss of all aboard. Critics of the waterspout theory note that such phenomena, while dangerous, are typically visible from a considerable distance, giving experienced sailors time to take evasive action rather than abandoning ship. Additionally, waterspouts usually leave visible damage to rigging and sails, which was not noted during the examination of the Mary Celeste. A third scientific explanation involves seismic activity beneath the ocean floor. A seaquake. The area between the Azores and the Portuguese mainland lies near the boundary between the Eurasian and African tectonic plates, a region with documented seismic activity. A substantial underwater earthquake could transmit energy through the water column, striking a wooden vessel with considerable force. Accounts from ships that have experienced seaquakes describe violent shuddering, sounds similar to artillery fire, and the sensation that the vessel has struck rocks or reef. Water in the bilges may churn dramatically, pumps may become temporarily inoperable, and the entire ship can vibrate with alarming intensity. To those unfamiliar with the phenomenon, a seaquake might reasonably suggest catastrophic hull damage. Geological records confirm seismic activity in the eastern Atlantic during the relevant period. If the Mary Celeste experienced a significant seaquake, Captain Briggs might have concluded that his vessel had suffered structural damage below the waterline. The moderate amount of water observed in the bilges could have resulted from temporary seepage during the seismic event, reinforcing the impression of hull damage. In this scenario, the crew would have deployed the lifeboat intending to stand off from the apparently damaged vessel while assessing its condition. The trailing rope found hanging from the Mary Celeste supports this theory, suggesting a tether between ship and lifeboat. A subsequent mishap, perhaps a sudden squall or the rope breaking unexpectedly, might have separated the lifeboat from the ship, leaving the crew adrift. Critics of the seaquake theory point out that experienced mariners, particularly a captain as methodical as Briggs, would likely have conducted a thorough inspection for damage before abandoning a vessel. Additionally, while seaquakes can be alarming, historical accounts rarely mention them causing ships to be abandoned unless accompanied by visible structural damage. A fourth scientific explanation centers on human psychology and the phenomenon of cascade failure in decision-making. This theory suggests that a series of minor but concerning events, none catastrophic in isolation, might have combined to create a perception of imminent danger that led to abandonment. In this scenario, the leaking alcohol barrels might have created unusual odors. Perhaps minor seepage increased water in the bilges slightly. Changing weather conditions might have generated unusual sounds in the ship's timbers. The cumulative effect of these minor anomalies, particularly for a captain with responsibility for his family's safety, could have triggered an evacuation decision that, in retrospect, appears unnecessary. Psychological research on decision-making under stress supports this cascading factors theory. When facing uncertainty and potential danger, humans tend to weight negative possibilities more heavily than positive ones, an evolutionary adaptation that favors caution. This negativity bias can lead to seemingly irrational decisions that actually represent an abundance of caution rather than panic. For Captain Briggs, the presence of his wife and young daughter would have significantly altered his risk calculation, a situation that an experienced captain might normally address through routine seamanship could take on greater significance when family safety was at stake. The psychological burden of responsibility for loved ones might have lowered the threshold for abandonment. This psychological theory is supported by the orderly nature of the abandonment. There were no signs of panic or chaos, suggesting a deliberate decision rather than a frenzied response to immediate danger. The chronometer and sextant were carefully removed. Personal valuables were left behind, and the abandonment appears to have been executed methodically, consistent with a reasoned, if ultimately unnecessary, precaution. A fifth scientific explanation combines elements of several theories into a comprehensive scenario. In this integrated model, the Mary Celeste encountered a period of rough weather around November 25, coinciding with the final log entry. During this turbulence, some alcohol barrels broke free from their securing, causing damage and leakage. The resulting fumes, combined with water sloshing in the bilges, created concerning conditions below decks. Captain Briggs, unable to precisely determine the extent of the problem in the rolling seas, might have ordered a temporary evacuation to the lifeboat, intending to remain tethered to the Mary Celeste until conditions stabilized. A subsequent weather event, perhaps a sudden squall or wave, might have severed the connecting rope separating the lifeboat from the ship. This integrated theory accounts for most of the observed evidence. The open hatches, the disarray in the hold, the cut rope, the missing lifeboat, and navigational instruments, and the generally seaworthy condition of the vessel. It requires no single catastrophic event, but rather a sequence of manageable incidents that collectively led to an unintended outcome. Scientific analysis of the Mary Celeste mystery benefits from modern understanding of phenomena that were poorly documented in the 1870s. Contemporary knowledge of combustion chemistry, meteorology, seismology, and psychology allows for more nuanced analysis than was possible during the original investigation. Modern marine safety experts have conducted detailed reviews of the Mary Celeste case, applying current standards and knowledge to the historical evidence. Their assessments generally support the possibility of a false alarm scenario, a situation where abandonment seemed necessary based on available information, but proved unnecessary in hindsight. The tragic irony in all these scientific explanations is that they suggest the crew and passengers of the Mary Celeste might have been safer remaining aboard rather than taking to the lifeboat. The North Atlantic in December offers poor survival prospects for a small open boat, particularly one possibly overloaded with 10 people. The mother vessel, despite whatever concerns prompted its abandonment, remained afloat and was eventually recovered intact. Scientists studying the case have also considered the subsequent fate of the lifeboat and its occupants. The prevailing currents in the region would likely have carried a drifting boat eastward toward the Azores, or, if further south, toward the African coast. Despite extensive inquiries at ports throughout the region, in the months following the incident, no trace of the lifeboat or its occupants was ever confirmed. Ocean current modeling, developed long after the Mary Celeste incident, suggests that an unpowered lifeboat in that region would likely have been carried into the complex current systems surrounding the Azores. Without adequate provisions or navigation capability, survival prospects would have diminished rapidly. The winter water temperatures in the North Atlantic, typically around 60 degrees F, 15 degrees C, would have presented a serious hypothermia risk, particularly for the child aboard. Ultimately, each scientific theory offers a plausible explanation for the abandonment while acknowledging the fundamental mystery that remains. Without survivor testimony or more definitive evidence, a conclusive determination remains impossible. The scientific approaches, however, demonstrate that rational explanations exist that require no supernatural elements or extraordinary circumstances, merely the unfortunate convergence of ordinary factors leading to a tragic outcome. The scientific theories surrounding the Mary Celeste abandonment continue to evolve as new analytical techniques and historical information emerge. Modern researchers have applied computational fluid dynamics to model potential alcohol vapor concentrations, used advanced meteorological modeling to reconstruct weather patterns from the period, and employed psychological research on decision-making to better understand the human factors involved. What distinguishes these scientific approaches from more fanciful explanations is their basis in established natural phenomena and human behavior. They seek to explain the abandonment not through extraordinary circumstances, but through understandable, if unfortunate, combinations of ordinary events, the same factors that have contributed to maritime disasters throughout human history. While scientific explanations offer rational frameworks for understanding the Mary Celeste mystery, they fail to satisfy the human appetite for the extraordinary. In the absence of conclusive evidence, more colorful theories emerged, ranging from piracy and maritime criminality to fantastic tales of sea monsters and supernatural intervention. These alternative explanations, though lacking scientific foundation, reveal much about humanity's enduring fascination with the inexplicable. The piracy theory appeared plausible at first glance. The late 19th century still witnessed occasional acts of maritime banditry, particularly in remote stretches of ocean. Proponents of this theory suggested that the Mary Celeste encountered pirates who captured or killed the crew and passengers before abandoning the vessel. This would explain the missing persons while leaving the cargo largely intact. However, careful examination reveals significant flaws in the piracy hypothesis. The Mary Celeste's route through the eastern Atlantic was heavily trafficked by commercial vessels in the 1870s, making it a poor hunting ground for pirates who typically operated in more isolated regions. More importantly, pirates of the era sought profit above all else. The alcohol cargo aboard the Mary Celeste represented substantial value, which no profit-minded pirate would abandon after capturing the vessel. Additionally, the orderly state of the ship contradicted pirate involvement. Historical accounts of piracy typically describe ransacking, with cabins overturned in search of valuables. The Mary Celeste's cabins remained largely undisturbed, with valuable items such as jewelry and money left untouched. No signs of violence or struggle were discovered during the thorough examination in Gibraltar. The deliberate nature of the abandonment, with navigational instruments carefully removed, suggested a considered decision rather than forced evacuation. Despite these inconsistencies, the piracy theory persisted in popular accounts, perhaps because it offered a comfortingly concrete explanation for an otherwise baffling situation. Human agency, even malevolent agency, proved easier to accept than pure maritime misfortune or human error. A more exotic variation on human interference involved the slave trade. Though officially abolished throughout most of the world by 1872, illegal slave trading continued in certain regions. Some speculated that the Mary Celeste crew might have encountered slavers and intervened, leading to their capture or death. This theory, however, suffers from the same geographical improbability as general piracy. The eastern Atlantic shipping lanes were too well patrolled for such activities to occur frequently. From the realm of marine biology came theories involving attacks by sea creatures. The giant squid, a rarely seen deep ocean predator capable of reaching enormous size, featured prominently in these accounts. Tales of kraken and ship-attacking cephalopods had circulated among mariners for centuries, occasionally supported by the recovery of massive squid specimens. Proponents of the squid theory suggested that such a creature might have surfaced near the Mary Celeste, terrifying the crew into abandoning ship. Some versions proposed that the squid directly attacked the vessel, or even seized crew members from the deck. While biologically implausible, giant squid lack both the aggressive tendencies and physical capability to attack ships. The theory tapped into primal maritime fears of unknown creatures lurking beneath the waves. Similar theories involved other marine predators. Shark attacks, whale collisions, and even speculative accounts of extinct or undiscovered sea monsters all found their way into the Mary Celeste narrative. These biological explanations, while scientifically unsupported, reveal the human tendency to personify danger, ascribing agency and intention to natural phenomena. Perhaps the most persistent non-scientific explanations involve the supernatural. The concept of ghost ships had deep roots in maritime tradition, long before the Mary Celeste incident. Sailors of many cultures shared tales of spectral vessels doomed to sail eternally, often as punishment for past transgressions. The Flying Dutchman, perhaps the most famous of these legends, had been part of European maritime folklore for at least 2 centuries before the Mary Celeste mystery. Some supernatural theories suggested that the Mary Celeste itself had encountered a ghost ship, terrifying the crew into abandoning their vessel. Others proposed more direct supernatural intervention, malevolent spirits that drove the crew to madness or death, mysterious fogs that transported them to another dimension, or ancient curses activated by disturbance of the cargo or passage through haunted waters. The Bermuda Triangle, that purported zone of heightened disappearances in the western Atlantic, became erroneously linked with the Mary Celeste in later accounts. This geographical confusion, the Mary Celeste was found hundreds of miles from the triangle's eastern boundary, did not prevent the association from becoming firmly established in popular culture. The Bermuda Triangle, though not scientifically recognized as an area of unusual maritime danger, provided a conveniently mysterious framework for unexplained disappearances. By the mid-20th century, extraterrestrial theories had joined the speculative canon surrounding the Mary Celeste. UFO enthusiasts suggested alien abduction as an explanation for the missing crew and passengers. The orderly nature of the abandonment, the absence of violence, and the failure to find survivors all aligned with certain patterns in claimed alien encounters. Though entirely without evidential support, these theories reflected evolving cultural preoccupations with space and extraterrestrial life. Time slips and dimensional portals represent another category of supernatural explanation. These theories propose that the Mary Celeste temporarily entered an anomalous zone where the normal laws of physics were suspended, causing the crew to experience temporal displacement or transfer to a parallel reality. While scientifically unfounded, such concepts appeal to the human imagination and have inspired numerous fictional treatments of the Mary Celeste story. Conspiracy theories regarding the Mary Celeste took various forms. Some suggested government involvement, proposing that British or American authorities had intercepted the vessel for mysterious purposes related to international intrigue. Others implicated the Freemasons, a frequent target of conspiracy theorists, noting that some shipping industry figures of the era had Masonic connections. These theories, like most conspiracy narratives, offered the psychological comfort of controlled malevolence rather than random misfortune. The insurance fraud theory, while grounded in financial rather than supernatural motives, evolved its own elaborate narratives. Despite the thorough investigation that cleared both Captain Briggs and the vessel's owners of fraudulent intent, speculation continued that the abandonment represented an insurance scheme gone wrong. These theories typically failed to explain why Briggs would include his wife and young daughter in such a dangerous deception. What these diverse, non-scientific explanations share is their attempt to impose narrative order on a fundamentally ambiguous event. Human cognition naturally seeks patterns and causality, finding random or unexplained occurrences deeply unsatisfying. The Mary Celeste abandonment, with its tantalizing collection of clues leading nowhere, creates cognitive dissonance that these theories attempt to resolve. Cultural scholars note that the Mary Celeste theories often reflect the anxieties and preoccupations of their era. In the late Victorian period, when the incident occurred, tales emphasized moral transgressions and divine punishment, reflecting that era's religious sensibilities. During the Cold War, theories involving government conspiracy and foreign agents gained prominence. The rise of environmental awareness brought explanations involving pollution-induced hallucinations or toxic cargo effects. Psychological analysis suggests that supernatural explanations fulfill emotional needs that scientific theories cannot address. They provide meaning and intention in place of random misfortune. They transform an ordinary maritime tragedy into a significant event with larger cosmic implications. They convert the missing crew and passengers from victims of circumstance into participants in an extraordinary occurrence. The enduring appeal of these non-scientific theories also reflects the unique horror of the Mary Celeste scenario. Few maritime situations generate more primal fear than the ghost ship, a vessel without human guidance, yet otherwise intact. The image violates our understanding of the natural order, suggesting forces beyond human comprehension. The Mary Celeste, found sailing without her people yet structurally sound, embodies this uncanny contradiction perfectly. Additionally, the presence of a family aboard the Mary Celeste added emotional resonance to the mystery. Captain Briggs' decision to bring his wife and young daughter on the voyage transformed the abandonment from a maritime incident into a family tragedy. The fate of 2-year-old Sophia Briggs particularly captured public imagination, adding poignancy to an already compelling mystery. The location of the abandonment also contributed to its mythological status. The eastern Atlantic near the Azores represents a transitional zone between the familiar shores of Europe and America and the vast, open ocean. This liminal space, neither fully charted territory nor completely unknown wilderness, provides an ideal setting for tales of the uncanny and supernatural. Ancient mariners had populated these waters with sirens, sea monsters, and magical islands. The Mary Celeste seemed to confirm that this region still held mysteries beyond rational explanation. The timing of the incident similarly contributed to its legendary status. The late 19th century marked a transitional period between traditional maritime knowledge and modern scientific understanding. Steam power was challenging sail, telegraphic communication was shrinking global distances, and rationalism was ascendant in intellectual circles. Yet, this scientific progress existed alongside traditional beliefs, superstitions, and spiritual frameworks. The Mary Celeste mystery emerged at precisely this juncture between old and new worldviews, allowing it to be interpreted through both frameworks. While supernatural and conspiratorial theories lack scientific credibility, they have undeniably contributed to the cultural longevity of the Mary Celeste story. Without these colorful elaborations, the case might have remained a maritime footnote, rather than becoming the archetypal ghost ship narrative. The very implausibility of these theories has paradoxically ensured the story's survival in popular consciousness. This cultural persistence reveals an important truth about maritime mysteries. Their value extends beyond factual circumstances into the realm of metaphor and meaning. The Mary Celeste, sailing empty yet intact, serves as a powerful symbol for abandonment, the uncanny, and the limitations of human knowledge. Like all great mysteries, it invites each generation to project its own fears, interests, and interpretations onto the basic framework of established facts. Interestingly, skepticism towards supernatural explanations emerged from unexpected quarters. Arthur Conan Doyle, whose fictional treatment of the Mary Celeste, under the slightly altered name Marie Celeste, significantly contributed to the mystery's fame, privately expressed belief in a natural explanation. Despite his personal interest in spiritualism later in life, Doyle suggested that a temporary panic, perhaps triggered by alcohol fumes or unusual weather, provided the most plausible explanation for the abandonment. Modern paranormal investigators have conducted various experiments attempting to establish supernatural explanations for the Mary Celeste mystery. Electronic voice phenomenon, EP. Sessions aboard similar period vessels claim to have captured voices speaking about abandonment and danger. Psychics have produced reported communications from the missing crew describing supernatural events. Dowsers have attempted to trace the lifeboat's path using pendulums over maps. While these approaches fall outside scientific methodology, they demonstrate the mystery's continuing power to inspire investigation and speculation. The internet era has added new dimensions to the Mary Celeste theories, allowing rapid dissemination of both factual research and unfounded speculation. Online forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries frequently feature the Mary Celeste case, with contributors proposing ever more elaborate explanations. Digital archives have made primary sources more accessible, enabling amateur researchers to develop their own theories based on original documentation rather than second-hand accounts. Documentary filmmakers have repeatedly revisited the case, often presenting both scientific and supernatural theories side by side. This juxtaposition, while potentially misleading in terms of relative credibility, accurately reflects the dual nature of the Mary Celeste in cultural memory. Simultaneously, a real maritime incident with rational explanations and a legendary ghost ship embodying humanity's deeper fears of the unknown. Perhaps the most significant contribution of the non-scientific theories is their preservation of the mystery itself. Had the Mary Celeste abandonment been definitively solved, it might have lost its cultural resonance. The absence of certainty creates space for imagination, allowing the story to evolve and adapt to changing cultural contexts. In this sense, the supernatural theories, while factually questionable, have performed valuable cultural work in maintaining public engagement with maritime history. The Mary Celeste thus occupies a unique position in the pantheon of maritime mysteries, thoroughly documented yet fundamentally unexplained, extensively investigated yet open to interpretation, historically significant yet mythologically resonant. The supernatural theories, while unlikely to provide factual answers, continue to ensure that this ghost ship sails on through our collective imagination, carrying its silent cargo of unanswered questions. The Mary Celeste abandonment might have remained a minor maritime footnote had it not been for the literary intervention of a young physician with a penchant for storytelling. In January 1884, the Cornhill magazine published a short story titled J. Habakkuk Jepson's Statement, purportedly a first-hand account of the Mary Celeste mystery. The anonymous author was Arthur Conan Doyle, then an obscure doctor years away from creating Sherlock Holmes. This fictional narrative, presented with convincing realism, would transform the Mary Celeste from a maritime curiosity into a cultural phenomenon. Doyle's story altered numerous facts, changing the ship's name to Marie Celeste and relocating the discovery to near the coast of Africa. He invented an entirely fictional explanation involving racial conflict, a mysterious artifact, and supernatural vengeance. Despite these fabrications, many readers accepted the tale as genuine testimony. Several newspapers reprinted portions as factual accounts, embedding Doyle's inventions into the public understanding of the case. The impact of Doyle's story cannot be overstated. The name alteration to Marie Celeste persists in popular usage to this day, despite being historically incorrect. His placement of the vessel near African waters contributed to later confusion about its actual location. Most significantly, his presentation of the ship as eerily intact with a still warm meal on the table and coffee in the cups became standard elements in subsequent retellings, despite contradicting the actual evidence. When questioned later about the story, Doyle expressed surprise at its being taken as fact, claiming he had assumed readers would recognize it as fiction. Nevertheless, the young author had demonstrated remarkable skill in blending historical fact with invented detail, creating a narrative far more compelling than the already intriguing reality. This fictionalization process, begun with Doyle's story, would continue throughout the cultural afterlife of the Mary Celeste. The story's publication coincided with growing public interest in mysteries and detective fiction. The late Victorian era witnessed the birth of modern mystery literature, with readers developing appetite for puzzles, clues, and rational investigation. The Mary Celeste, with its tantalizing collection of evidence leading nowhere, provided an ideal template for this emerging genre. Doyle himself would later incorporate similar mysterious circumstances into his Sherlock Holmes stories. Newspaper coverage of the Mary Celeste continued sporadically in the decades following the incident, often reviving during slow news periods or when similar maritime mysteries occurred. These accounts frequently incorporated embellishments and fabrications, gradually transforming the historical event into something approaching urban legend. The sensationalist press of the late 19th century found the ghost ship narrative irresistible, using it to boost circulation during competitive publishing periods. By the early 20th century, the Mary Celeste had become a standard reference point for mysterious disappearances. When the Carol A. Deering was found abandoned off North Carolina in 1921, newspapers immediately dubbed it the New Mary Celeste. Similar comparisons have been made with virtually every deserted vessel discovered since, regardless of the actual circumstances. The Mary Celeste thus became not merely a specific historical incident, but a category of maritime mystery. The transition to visual media brought new dimensions to the Mary Celeste legend. Early films seized upon the dramatic potential of the ghost ship narrative. The British film The Mystery of the Mary Celeste, released in the United States as Phantom Ship, appeared in 1935, starring Bela Lugosi fresh from his Dracula success. This highly fictionalized account proposed a murderous conspiracy explanation, with Lugosi's character methodically eliminating the crew. Though commercially unsuccessful, it established the pattern of using the historical mystery as framework for entirely fictional narratives. Television documentaries returned repeatedly to the Mary Celeste case throughout the medium's history. From early anthology series like One Step Beyond, which presented a supernatural interpretation in 1959, to modern investigations on channels like Discovery, History, and Smithsonian, the story's visual potential has proven enduring. These productions typically feature atmospheric reenactments of the abandonment, dramatic narration emphasizing the mystery's unsolved nature, and interviews with maritime historians offering competing theories. Radio adaptations similarly exploited the atmospheric potential of the ghost ship narrative. The Mercury Theater, Suspense, and CBS Radio Mystery Theater all produced dramatizations, recognizing that the story's uncanny elements worked particularly well in audio format. The sounds of creaking timbers, flapping sails, and an empty vessel rolling in Atlantic swells created powerful auditory imagery that compensated for radio's visual limitations. In literature, the Mary Celeste inspired countless fictional treatments beyond Doyle's seminal story. From passing references in maritime novels to central plot elements in supernatural tales, the abandoned brigantine became a recurring motif in adventure fiction. Its narrative flexibility allowed it to function as historical mystery, ghost story framework, or metaphorical device, depending on the author's requirements. Children's literature embraced the Mary Celeste with particular enthusiasm. The combination of maritime adventure, unsolved mystery, and absence of graphic violence made the story ideal for younger readers. Scholastic Books and similar publishers produced numerous simplified accounts for educational markets, introducing generations of schoolchildren to the basics of the mystery. These versions typically emphasized the puzzle-solving aspects while downplaying potentially frightening elements. Comic books and graphic novels found the Mary Celeste equally adaptable. From straightforward historical treatments in educational comics to elaborate supernatural reimaginings in horror titles, the visual medium allowed dramatic depictions of the abandoned vessel and speculative scenes of the crew's fate. The distinctive silhouette of the brigantine, drifting without human guidance, became an instantly recognizable visual shorthand for mystery and abandonment. The gaming industry incorporated the Mary Celeste into various formats, from text adventures in the early computing era to modern immersive experiences. These interactive narratives typically place players aboard the abandoned vessel, tasked with solving the mystery through exploration and clue discovery. The ship's confined setting and built-in mystery provide natural gaming parameters, with the historical ambiguity allowing developers considerable creative freedom. Musical references to the Mary Celeste span numerous genres. Folk musicians have composed ballads recounting the mystery. Heavy metal bands have created concept albums exploring supernatural explanations, and classical composers have written atmospheric pieces evoking the empty vessel. The story's emotional resonance translates effectively to musical expression, with compositions typically emphasizing themes of abandonment, mystery, and maritime danger. Beyond specific media adaptations, the Mary Celeste entered broader cultural discourse as metaphorical shorthand. The phrase "like the Mary Celeste" became colloquial description for any mysteriously abandoned location. Journalists applied the comparison to empty buildings, deserted towns, and evacuated areas. Politicians used the reference when describing abandoned policies or initiatives. The ship's name thus transcended its specific historical context to become linguistic shorthand for inexplicable abandonment. Academic interest in the Mary Celeste operates on multiple levels. Maritime historians examine the case as an example of 19th century shipping practices, safety procedures, and investigative techniques. Cultural scholars analyze the narrative's evolution from historical incident to mythological archetype. Psychologists study its persistent appeal as illustration of human response to ambiguity and the unknown. This multidisciplinary approach demonstrates the story's unusual capacity to illuminate diverse aspects of human experience. Conspiracy theorists and paranormal investigators maintain dedicated interest in the Mary Celeste, often treating it as evidence for preferred explanatory frameworks. UFO researchers cite it as early example of alien abduction. Bermuda Triangle proponents incorrectly included in their catalogs of mysterious disappearances in that region. Paranormal groups conduct seances attempting to contact the missing crew. These approaches, while scientifically problematic, demonstrate the mystery's enduring power to inspire investigation and speculation. The tourism industry has capitalized on the Mary Celeste connection in several locations. Nova Scotia's maritime museums highlight the vessel's construction in the province. Gibraltar promotes its role in the investigation. The Azores mention the mystery in tourism materials, noting the ship's proximity to the islands when abandoned. Gift shops in these locations offer books, models, and memorabilia related to the famous ghost ship, demonstrating its commercial appeal nearly 150 years after the incident. Museum exhibitions about the Mary Celeste typically combine historical artifacts with interactive elements exploring various theories. Ship models, period, navigation, instruments, and reproductions of key documents provide historical context, while interactive stations allow visitors to evaluate evidence and develop their own conclusions. This participatory approach acknowledges the mystery's unsolved status, while encouraging critical thinking about historical evidence. The internet era has dramatically expanded access to Mary Celeste information, while simultaneously spreading misinformation. Digital archives make primary sources available to casual researchers. Online forums enable theory exchange among enthusiasts worldwide. Social media facilitates rapid sharing of both scholarly articles and unfounded speculation. This democratization of information has broadened interest in the case, while complicating efforts to separate historical fact from accumulated fiction. Documentary filmmakers regularly revisit the Mary Celeste, often applying new technologies or investigative approaches to the old mystery. Underwater archaeology, weather modeling software, forensic techniques, and historical document analysis feature in these modern investigations. While none has definitively solved the mystery, these productions maintain public engagement with the historical event and introduce the story to new generations. Literary scholars note that the Mary Celeste narrative contains elements of classical tragedy. The prominent role of family, the hubris implied in bringing women and children on a merchant voyage, and the ultimately futile attempt to escape danger all resonate with ancient tragic structures. The absence of a conclusive ending, however, violates traditional narrative closure, perhaps explaining the persistent drive to create fictional resolutions for the unresolved historical mystery. Anthropologists observe that ghost ship narratives exist in virtually all maritime cultures, suggesting a universal human response to the uncanny image of a vessel without human control. The Mary Celeste, as the best documented example of this phenomenon, serves as focal point for a scholarly examination of these cross-cultural patterns. The ship functions simultaneously as specific historical incident and archetypal expression of maritime anxiety, bridging particular and universal aspects of human experience. The Mary Celeste's cultural impact extends beyond direct references to influence broader nautical fiction. The concept of the derelict vessel as site of mystery and potential supernatural activity became a standard trope in maritime literature and film done. From The Floating Admiral, 1931, to Ghost Ship, 2002, countless works feature abandoned vessels harboring dark secrets. Each fictional treatment reinforces the Mary Celeste's status as the archetypal maritime mystery. Contemporary artists continue finding inspiration in the Mary Celeste narrative. Visual artists create atmospheric paintings of the abandoned vessel. Playwrights develop psychological dramas exploring the crew's final hours. Novelists reimagine the story from perspectives of specific crew members or fictional stowaways. The mystery's unresolved nature provides creative freedom, while its historical foundation offers narrative structure, creating ideal conditions for artistic exploration. As the Mary Celeste approaches the 150th anniversary of its abandonment, its cultural resonance shows no sign of diminishing. The combination of documented facts and unanswered questions continues generating new interpretations and artistic responses. Each generation discovers the mystery anew, applying contemporary perspectives and preoccupations to the enduring enigma of 10 people who stepped off a seaworthy vessel into historical oblivion, leaving behind only an empty ship and an indelible mark on our collective imagination. Despite nearly 150 years passing since the Mary Celeste was found abandoned, the mystery continues to inspire new investigations, employing modern techniques unavailable to the original inquirers. Contemporary researchers have applied forensic science, advanced meteorological modeling, archival research methods, and computer simulations to re-examine the evidence. These modern approaches, while not definitively solving the mystery, have yielded valuable new insights and eliminated certain possibilities. The most comprehensive modern investigation began in 2001, when documentary filmmaker Anne McGregor undertook a multi-year research project, eventually featured in the Smithsonian Channel's The True Story of the Mary Celeste. McGregor approached the mystery with fresh eyes, applying contemporary investigative techniques while maintaining rigorous historical standards. Her team gathered original documents from archives in New York, London, Gibraltar, and Portugal, including materials not examined by previous researchers. McGregor's investigation revealed several crucial pieces of evidence overlooked in earlier accounts. Among the most significant was the state of the ship's sounding rod, used to measure water levels in the bilge. The rod was found on deck, rather than in its storage location, suggesting the crew had been actively monitoring water levels shortly before abandonment. This detail supported theories involving perceived flooding or hull damage. Another key discovery involved the ship's chronometer. While previous accounts noted its absence, McGregor's research uncovered insurance documents specifying the exact model and serial number. This precision allowed her team to determine that the chronometer required winding every 56 hours. The timing proved significant when considering possible abandonment scenarios and the crew's ability to navigate after leaving the ship. Using advanced meteorological data, McGregor's team reconstructed weather patterns in the eastern Atlantic during late November and early December 1872. Their analysis identified a period of significant atmospheric disturbance moving through the region on November 24 to 25, bringing force 8 winds, fresh gale on the Beaufort scale, and challenging sea conditions. These findings aligned with the final log entry and suggested a potential catalyst for the chain of events leading to abandonment. Modern understanding of materials science also informed the investigation. The 9 empty alcohol barrels discovered in the hold were subjected to computer modeling to determine likely leakage patterns and vapor concentrations. This analysis confirmed that alcohol fumes could have reached concerning levels in confined spaces, particularly if hatches were initially closed during rough weather. The team calculated that approximately 450 gallons of alcohol had leaked, potentially generating significant vapor. In 2006, author Brian Hicks published Ghost Ship, the mysterious true story of the Mary Celeste and her missing crew, incorporating previously untapped sources, including descendants' family papers. Hicks uncovered personal letters written by Captain Briggs, describing his new command and documenting modifications made to the vessel before her final voyage. These letters revealed Briggs' concerns about the ship's pumping system, which he had upgraded prior to departure, a detail supporting theories involving perceived flooding. Hicks also discovered documentation of a little-known structural characteristic of the Mary Celeste. The main cargo hold had been modified with a longitudinal bulkhead, essentially dividing it into 2 sections. This design feature, intended to prevent cargo shifting, would have affected how alcohol leaked from damaged barrels and potentially created uneven weight distribution during rough seas. This structural detail had been omitted from most previous accounts, but proved significant in understanding the vessel's behavior. German researcher Eigil Wiese conducted extensive archival research in European maritime records, uncovering meteorological data from multiple vessels in the vicinity of the Mary Celeste during the critical period. His findings, published in 2011, documented a significant north-south temperature gradient in the region, creating conditions conducive to rapid weather changes and possible waterspout formation. This meteorological evidence strengthened theories involving sudden, localized severe weather as a catalyst for abandonment. Physical examinations of similar vessels from the era have provided new insights into the Mary Celeste's structural characteristics. Naval archaeologists studying preserved 19th century merchant vessels identified common weaknesses in brigantine construction, particularly around the main hatch and chain plates, fittings securing the rigging to the hull. These structural vulnerabilities could generate alarming noises and temporary leaking during heavy seas, without compromising overall seaworthiness. In 2012, The University of Glasgow's Marine Engineering Department employed computer modeling to simulate the Mary Celeste's behavior under various weather conditions. Their analysis demonstrated that the vessel's specific design made it susceptible to a phenomenon called sallying, a particular rolling motion that could cause partially secured cargo to shift suddenly. This movement could generate loud noises resembling structural failure while simultaneously forcing additional alcohol from damaged barrels. Documentary teams from National Geographic and the Discovery Channel conducted reenactment experiments using period-accurate vessels and materials. These practical tests yielded valuable insights into how 19th century sailors would have responded to specific emergency scenarios. One significant finding involved the behavior of alcohol vapor in confined spaces. When ignited under controlled conditions, it produced exactly the kind of rapid, self-extinguishing explosion that might have triggered abandonment without leaving obvious fire damage. Advances in understanding human psychology and decision-making have informed modern analyses of Captain Briggs' potential reasoning. Maritime psychologists specializing in emergency response have identified the cumulative stress model as particularly relevant to the Mary Celeste case. This model demonstrates how multiple minor problems, none catastrophic in isolation, can collectively overwhelm decision-makers, particularly when responsible for family members or passengers. The discovery of previously overlooked depositions from the Gibraltar inquiry has shed new light on the vessel's condition when found. Testimony from Oliver DeVoe, the first mate of the DEI Gracia, who initially boarded the Mary Celeste, described finding ropes that appeared to have been deliberately rigged to tow the lifeboat behind the main vessel. This detail, absent from many historical accounts, strongly supports theories involving a planned temporary evacuation rather than permanent abandonment. Forensic analysis of weather patterns has identified another significant factor: the presence of a false horizon phenomenon. Under certain atmospheric conditions, common in the eastern Atlantic during winter, temperature inversions can create an optical illusion, making distant waves appear much larger than their actual size. Modern understanding of this phenomenon suggests that an experienced captain might misinterpret normal waves as dangerous rogues, potentially influencing evacuation decisions. Archival research in insurance company records has yielded information about the Mary Celeste's lifeboat, previously described only as missing. Documents specify it as a standard ship's yawl, measuring approximately 20 feet long, with capacity for all 10 people aboard, but minimal freeboard. Distance between waterline and gunwale, when fully loaded. Maritime safety experts note that such a vessel would have been extremely vulnerable in Atlantic winter conditions, particularly if overloaded. The role of the alcohol cargo has received renewed attention through chemical analysis. Industrial alcohol of the type transported by the Mary Celeste contained various impurities, including methanol and other toxic compounds. Modern toxicologists have suggested that even limited exposure to these vapors could cause symptoms including headaches, dizziness, and impaired judgment, potentially affecting decision-making during a developing crisis. In 2015, researchers examining Gibraltar customs records discovered overlooked details about the Mary Celeste's cargo. In addition to the well-documented alcohol barrels, the manifest listed several barrels of lubricating oil and maintenance supplies. Chemical analysis of period-typical lubricants revealed they often contained volatile petroleum distillates that, when combined with alcohol vapors, could create an even more explosive atmosphere than alcohol alone. Historical climatologists have identified the winter of 1872 to 1873 as part of a transitional climate period with unusually volatile weather patterns in the North Atlantic. This era, part of the ending phase of the Little Ice Age, featured rapid temperature fluctuations and intensified storm systems. These broader climatological findings provide context for understanding the challenging conditions the Mary Celeste likely encountered. Canadian researchers examining shipping records from Nova Scotia discovered that the Mary Celeste had undergone more extensive structural modifications than previously documented. The conversion from its original configuration, as the Amazon included significant changes to the hull shape and internal bracing. Naval architects analyzing these modifications have suggested they could have altered the vessel's behavior in heavy seas, potentially generating unusual movement patterns and structural sounds unfamiliar to the crew. The Gibraltar archives yielded another overlooked detail, testimony mentioning a makeshift railing constructed on the Mary Celeste's starboard side, apparently erected shortly before abandonment. This improvised structure, combined with evidence of repairs to the ship's regular railing, suggests possible damage from heavy seas that might have contributed to the captain's concerns about the vessel's integrity. Modern understanding of the psychology of maritime disasters has highlighted the significance of lifeboat anxiety, the fear that deteriorating conditions might eventually prevent lifeboat launch. This phenomenon, well documented in modern maritime emergencies, often leads to precautionary evacuations that, in hindsight, prove unnecessary. Applied to the Mary Celeste scenario, this psychological factor offers a rational explanation for abandoning a damaged but floating vessel. Italian maritime historians, examining Mediterranean shipping records, discovered accounts of alcohol vapor explosions aboard other vessels carrying similar cargo during the same period. These incidents, while not catastrophic, were documented as causing significant alarm among experienced crews. This historical context suggests that the Mary Celeste's crew might have been responding to a genuinely frightening, if ultimately non-fatal occurrence. Hydrographic research into Atlantic current patterns has yielded insights into the likely drift of a lifeboat launched from the Mary Celeste's last known position. Computer modeling indicates that prevailing currents would have carried a small boat toward either the Azores or the African coast, depending on precise wind conditions. Extensive searches of port records in both regions have failed to locate any reports of lifeboat survivors, suggesting the small craft likely foundered in open waters. In 2018, researchers using ground-penetrating radar examined unmarked graves in coastal communities of the Azores and Portugal, seeking evidence of unidentified maritime casualties from the correct time period. While several unidentified sailor burials were located, none could be definitively connected to the Mary Celeste crew. DNA technology stands ready should any candidate remains be discovered, as genealogists have identified living descendants of several crew members. The application of modern oceanographic knowledge has led to another theory involving microseismic events. The region where the Mary Celeste was abandoned experiences frequent small underwater tremors that, while not registering as significant earthquakes, can transmit energy through the water column in ways that impact wooden vessels. Modern research vessels have documented how these events can create sounds mimicking catastrophic hull damage while causing minimal actual harm. Analysis of Captain Briggs' known decision-making patterns, derived from accounts of his previous commands, reveals a consistently cautious approach to risk, particularly regarding passenger safety. This psychological profile supports theories involving precautionary evacuation rather than panic or irrational behavior. As an experienced captain with family aboard, Briggs would have weighted safety margins differently than a commander responsible only for cargo and crew. The Smithsonian Institution's examination of period-typical navigational practices highlighted another critical factor: the limited navigational capability available to a lifeboat in 1872. Even with a sextant and chronometer, accurate navigation from a small rolling vessel presented extreme challenges. This technical limitation makes the crew's failure to reach safety more understandable, particularly if unexpected currents or weather separated them from their planned destination. While modern investigations have not definitively solved the Mary Celeste mystery, they have significantly narrowed the range of plausible explanations. Contemporary analysis strongly supports scenarios involving a combination of factors: alcohol vapor, challenging weather, structural concerns, and psychological factors, leading to a precautionary evacuation that tragically resulted in the loss of all in the lifeboat. The ghost ship thus remains partly explained, but never fully resolved, a maritime enigma bridging historical fact and enduring mystery. The Mary Celeste did not conclude her career with the famous abandonment of 1872. After the Gibraltar inquiry, the vessel was eventually released to her owners and returned to commercial service. Her notoriety as a ghost ship made her an unattractive posting for superstitious sailors, but economic necessity ensured she continued sailing under various captains for another dozen years. Her movements during this period were meticulously documented, as her famous name attracted attention in every port she entered. The ship's post-mystery career proved largely unremarkable until her final voyage. In 1884, the Mary Celeste came under the ownership of Captain G.C. Parker, who would orchestrate her destruction in one of the most transparent insurance frauds of the era. Parker deliberately wrecked the aging vessel on a reef near Haiti in January 1885, having first removed anything of value and insured the ship and a fictitious cargo for an inflated sum of $30,000. Parker's scheme unraveled almost immediately. The valuable cargo consisted primarily of worthless items and water-filled barrels. Local salvage workers reported the suspicious circumstances to authorities. An investigation revealed that Parker had run the ship onto the reef in calm weather under full sail, an act difficult to explain as accidental. Parker was subsequently tried for barratry, the deliberate destruction of a vessel for fraudulent purposes, though he ultimately escaped conviction due to legal technicalities. This ignominious end provided a sad epilogue to the vessel's storied career. The Mary Celeste, once the center of maritime mystery, concluded her days as the subject of a clumsy criminal scheme. The remains of her hull, broken on the Rochela Reef off Haiti, gradually disintegrated in the Caribbean waters, leaving no physical trace of the infamous ghost ship for future generations to examine. The deliberate destruction of the Mary Celeste eliminated any possibility of modern researchers examining the vessel itself for overlooked clues. Unlike other famous ships preserved as museums or discovered as underwater archaeological sites, the Mary Celeste exists now only in documentation, illustrations, and cultural memory. This physical absence has arguably enhanced her mystique, allowing her to transcend material existence to become pure narrative. The Mary Celeste abandonment generated immediate changes in maritime practice. Insurance companies instituted more rigorous inspection requirements for vessels carrying alcohol and other volatile cargoes. Improved methods for securing barrels in ships' holds were developed and standardized. Navigation officers received additional training regarding abandonment protocols and the circumstances under which leaving a vessel could be justified. These practical reforms represented the maritime industry's attempt to prevent similar incidents, regardless of which theory explained the original abandonment. More significantly, the Mary Celeste case influenced the development of formal marine accident investigation procedures. The somewhat haphazard and legally focused Gibraltar inquiry, with its emphasis on salvage rights rather than safety lessons, highlighted the need for more structured approaches to maritime incidents. By the early 20th century, most maritime nations had established dedicated marine investigation boards, tasked with determining causes and preventative measures rather than merely assigning legal liability. The case also accelerated improvements in lifeboat design and deployment. The complete disappearance of the Mary Celeste's lifeboat and all aboard her underscored the vulnerability of small craft in open ocean conditions. Subsequent developments in lifeboat construction included improved stability designs, mandatory provisioning standards, and eventually radio equipment. Modern safety legislation requiring adequate lifeboat capacity for all aboard passenger vessels traces its conceptual origins to disasters like the Mary Celeste, where evacuation led to greater danger than remaining aboard. Communications technology development gained momentum, partly in response to cases like the Mary Celeste. The complete isolation of vessels at sea, with no ability to request assistance or report conditions, contributed to the danger faced by 19th century mariners. The subsequent development of ship-to-shore radio, emergency beacons, and eventually satellite communication systems addressed this vulnerability, ensuring that modern vessels rarely disappear without trace unless overwhelming catastrophe occurs. Weather forecasting improvements similarly received impetus from maritime mysteries. If, as many theories suggest, the Mary Celeste abandonment resulted partly from threatening weather conditions, better predictive capability might have prevented the tragedy. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw rapid advancement in meteorological science, with shipping interests providing significant funding and practical application for these developments. Beyond these practical influences, the Mary Celeste's greatest legacy lies in its cultural impact. The abandonment created the template for maritime mystery narratives, establishing tropes and patterns that would reappear in both factual and fictional accounts for generations. The image of the intact ship, devoid of human presence, became a powerful archetype in maritime literature, film, and folklore, representing the uncanny intersection of the familiar and inexplicable. The Mary Celeste story emerged during a period of transition between traditional maritime culture and the modern industrial era. Sailing ships were giving way to steam power, traditional navigation yielding to newer technologies, and ancient superstitions competing with rational explanation. This liminal historical position helps explain the case's enduring fascination. It stands at the threshold between old and new worldviews, between mystery and science, between accepted limitations of knowledge and modern demands for definitive answers. In psychological terms, the Mary Celeste represents what scholars call an ambiguity trauma, an event disturbing not primarily for its violence or destruction, but for its resistance to coherent explanation. Human cognition naturally seeks narrative closure and causal understanding. When confronted with events that defy such resolution, we experience cognitive discomfort that demands resolution through either continued investigation or mythological elaboration. The Mary Celeste abandonment offers a perfect case study in this psychological process. Maritime historians note that the Mary Celeste has achieved an almost mythological status, surpassing more destructive disasters. The loss of the Titanic, for instance, while claiming far more lives, presents relatively straightforward causation. A collision with an iceberg, inadequate lifeboats, and human error. The Mary Celeste, by contrast, offers no such clarity. This ambiguity paradoxically ensures greater longevity in cultural memory, as each generation can project its own interpretations onto the fundamental mystery. The absence of closure regarding the fate of those aboard creates particular poignancy. Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, their daughter Sophia, and the 7 crew members exist in a state of perpetual uncertainty, not definitively dead but beyond any reasonable hope of survival. This liminal status, neither fully present nor absent from history, creates a narrative vacancy that invites perpetual retelling and reimagining. Their untold story becomes, in effect, infinitely tellable through speculation and fiction. For maritime communities, the Mary Celeste represents an uncomfortable reminder of the sea's fundamental unpredictability. Despite technological advances, regulatory frameworks, and improved safety systems, the ocean remains capable of producing circumstances that defy easy explanation or prevention. This reminder of inherent uncertainty challenges the modern presumption of control over natural forces and technological systems. The story's persistence also reflects changing attitudes toward historical evidence. Contemporary audiences, accustomed to exhaustive documentation through digital media, find it almost inconceivable that a major event could remain unexplained despite investigation. The Mary Celeste case highlights the limitations of historical knowledge, the finality of evidence loss, the impossibility of questioning participants, and the decay of physical artifacts that might contain crucial information. Educational systems worldwide have embraced the Mary Celeste as a teaching tool. Beyond maritime history specifically, the case provides an ideal framework for discussing historical methodology, evidence evaluation, theory formation, and the distinction between speculation and fact. Students, analyzing the various explanations, must engage with principles of logical reasoning, probability assessment, and the weighing of competing narratives based on limited evidence. Environmental historians have recently re-examined the Mary Celeste abandonment through the lens of human-nature interaction. The vulnerability of wooden vessels to weather conditions, the challenges of navigating without modern forecasting, and the isolation imposed by communication limitations all reflect humanity's historical relationship with natural force. The abandonment thus serves as a case study in environmental history, demonstrating how natural conditions shaped human decision-making with tragic consequences. Gender analysis offers another contemporary perspective on the Mary Celeste narrative. The presence of Sarah and Sophia Briggs aboard a merchant vessel was unusual for the era, reflecting Captain Briggs' unwillingness to accept the extended family separations typical of maritime careers. Their inclusion in the abandonment scenario potentially influenced decision-making, as safety calculations would necessarily differ when women and children were involved. This gendered dimension adds complexity to understanding the choices made aboard the vessel. For philosophers and epistemologists, the Mary Celeste presents a classic example of underdetermination, a situation where available evidence supports multiple incompatible explanations. This philosophical problem, central to scientific reasoning and historical analysis, finds perfect expression in the competing theories surrounding the abandonment. The case demonstrates how rational evaluation of evidence can lead to divergent conclusions when crucial information remains inaccessible. The digital era has transformed engagement with the Mary Celeste mystery. Online forums dedicated to unsolved historical cases feature robust discussions of competing theories. Virtual reality reconstructions allow users to explore digital models of the vessel and evaluate abandonment scenarios. Citizen historians digitize and analyze previously inaccessible documents. This democratization of historical investigation ensures the mystery remains vibrant in contemporary discourse rather than relegated to academic archives. Perhaps most significantly, the Mary Celeste abandonment raises profound questions about historical knowledge itself. What constitutes adequate explanation for past events? How do we balance competing interpretations when definitive evidence is unavailable? To what extent can we understand historical actors' decisions without access to their thought processes? The case thus functions not merely as historical curiosity, but as philosophical inquiry into the nature and limitations of historical understanding. The story's endurance also reflects fundamental human relationship with mystery itself. In an era of unprecedented information accessibility, genuine unsolved mysteries acquire increased cultural value. They remind us that, despite technological advancement and scientific progress, aspects of reality remain beyond our complete understanding or control. This humbling recognition perhaps explains why the Mary Celeste continues fascinating audiences in our data-saturated age. It represents a pocket of genuine unknowing in a world that increasingly presumes total knowledge is possible. As the Mary Celeste abandonment approaches its 150th anniversary in 2022, its position in maritime lore appears secure. The case continues generating books, documentaries, digital reconstructions, and imaginative reinterpretations. Unlike historical events with clearer resolutions, the Mary Celeste mystery remains eternally contemporary, perpetually open to new investigation and interpretation. The fundamental questions: what happened aboard that vessel in late November 1872? And why did 10 people abandon a seaworthy ship for an ultimately fatal alternative remain as compelling today as when first asked? The empty ship drifting through Atlantic swells thus sails on through our collective imagination, carrying its cargo of unanswered questions and human mystery. In its silence, the Mary Celeste speaks to our relationship with uncertainty, our need for narrative coherence, and our endless fascination with the boundaries between the known and unknown. In this capacity, the ghost ship has achieved a form of immortality beyond mere historical incident. It has become an enduring symbol of mystery itself, a floating enigma that continues challenging our understanding of the world and our place within it. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of maritime history's most enduring mysteries. If you've enjoyed this exploration of the Mary Celeste, please consider subscribing to Insomnia History for more historical narratives designed to inform, entertain, and perhaps help you drift peacefully to sleep. Until next time, remember that history's greatest mysteries often offer more value in their questions than their answers.